my grandpa made me this table. 1987. That's been 30 years ago. Made it the year after I was born. He had this way of going out to his shop. He'd go out there, cigarette in hand or mouth, one of the two. He'd have a ball cap on, and usually a flannel shirt or jacket, depending on the season. That usually reeked like smoke. He'd go into his garage and he'd tinker. He'd tinker, and that's what he did. He was a tinkerer. After he got done with his work, then he would examine it and then realize it needed more tinkering, and so he'd tinker some more. And this was one of the pieces that he finished, a wooden table. This particular table has 4 legs that screw in. And you need all 4 legs in order for the table to balance. But once you have all 4 legs, the table can support a fair amount, even a 200-pound man. See, balance is necessary for this table to stand. It's necessary for it to support whatever's on it. Today we're going to have an awkward sermon. Very awkward. Awkward for you, awkward for me, just awkward all the way around. Today we're going to talk about giving to the church. I know, I don't want to do it either. But it's one of those things that we have to talk about, and more specifically, why we should give to this church, the local church, Park Street Church. Why give here? Why does giving to the church matter? Now, more than just me blabbing on about giving, we're going to talk specifically about balancing and why balance and giving are connected and why it's beneficial and all of that. But let's just address the elephant in the room. Namely, me. I get paid by the church, right? So it seems a bit odd for me to be asking you to give. And yet, that's what we're both called to do. Biblically, by our Heavenly Father. So here we go, an awkward sermon about giving from me to you. If you protest, just tell the people who aren't here that it was about something else. That way they'll come back. Shirley read a passage from 2 Corinthians, and that's not the passage we're going to be in, but it's a good complement to the passage that we're going to be in. And I wanted to start with the Corinthians passage because it kind of sets our hearts where they need to be so that we can approach the text that we're going to approach, which is in 2 Kings chapter 12. So if you have a Bible or a phone or anything of that nature, if you've memorized 2 Kings, good for you. 2 Kings chapter 12, we're going to start with verse 1, and we're going to talk about why should I give money to Park Street Church. The first reason why you should give money to Park Street Church, why I should give money to Park Street Church, is I give out of thanks to God. I give out of thanks to God. Last week, we talked a little bit about gratefulness and how being grateful to God helps shape who we are and helps kind of develop the rest of our life. And so I'm going to carry that theme forward just a bit into this week. I give out of thanks to God. Thanks for all sorts of things. Are you in 2 Kings yet? 2 Kings chapter 12. 2 Kings chapter 12. 2 Kings is in the Old Testament, if you don't know. I'll give you a bit of context. 2 Kings is a history. It was recorded, as you can tell in your bulletin, there's a little fun fact section about today's text. It was recorded while the Jews were in exile many, many, many years later, hundreds of years later, written down so that they would have written record of their history from the time of the end of David's reign to the beginning of the exile. We are in the time of kings. The time of kingdoms even, when the nation of Israel is split between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The dates, as you can see, are a few hundred years before the birth of Christ, so don't even think that Jesus has appeared on the scene yet. No Paul or Peter. And David has recently died just a while ago. And so there's this succession of kings trying to lead Israel. Some do well, some not so much. 2 Kings chapter 12. In the 7th year of Jehu, Joash became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 40 years. His mother's name was Zibiah. She was from Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years Jehoiada the priest instructed him. The high places, however, were not removed. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. So today we're talking about Joash. Everybody say Joash. Joash. Now Joash, I don't know if you noticed as you were turning to 2 Kings chapter 12, at the very end of chapter 11, it gives us a brief little tidbit about Joash. It says that Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. Anybody begin to rule a kingdom when you were 7? No? Anybody still picking your nose at 17, 27, 30, never mind. So Joash, at 7 years old, his parents are killed because they weren't good kings and queens and leaders. They're knocked out, and so Joash is elevated to king, but a 7-year-old can't rule. And so he was appointed a counselor, a guy. His name was Jehoiada. I won't ask you to repeat that one. Jehoiada was the high priest at the time. Jehoiada was a good guy. The nation of Israel liked him. All the people liked him. He followed God, followed him closely, did well with all of that. And so Jehoiada would instruct Joash on how he should rule and reign, how he should live, what he should do. And as we can tell in 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 2, it says Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. At least all the years that Jehoiada the priest instructed him. He did right in the eyes of the Lord because he had a guide. He had someone there instructing him, telling him all that he should do. You can imagine those early days when they're having their lessons and Joash is seated and Jehoiada is instructing him on the ancient scriptures, and he tells him about the time that Moses, the great leader, led his people out of Egypt in the great Exodus. Do you remember the Exodus? No. Yeah. And they crossed over the Red Sea miraculously, and God met them on the mountain, and Moses went up there, and he got the 10 Commandments, and he brought them down for the people, and all of these rules about how they should live and interact with each other, a framework for a healthy nation. He would tell him about our father, the father of our nation, Abraham, actually had the faith to leave his father's household and to go out with his wife and his nephew, pursuing God in his everyday until God brought him to the promised land. And Joash would sit and he'd listen to these things, and he'd hear all the lessons and all the history of his people, and he did right in the eyes of the Lord. He recognized what God had done for him, and it came out through his own obedience. He recognized what God had done for him and for the rest of humanity and for his people, and it was exemplified, it was shown, it was gratified through his own obedience. I give out of thanks to God. But, as you're reading along through the Old Testament especially, you come across these bits and pieces throughout the narratives and the historical records. Bits and pieces added as the editors are writing, and oftentimes writing hundreds of years later just so that there is a written record. Writing, and they give some foreshadowing. For instance, verse 2, Joash did right in the eyes of the Lord, while Jehoiada was instructing. Some foreshadowing there. Then verse 3, the high places weren't destroyed, however. People still went up and burnt sacrifice up there. High places being the altars, those pagan areas where you would go up and worship the regional gods and goddesses. See, while everything was hunky-dory, everything was Joe Christian down in the city, on the outskirts of town, there were these high places up on the mountains where people would go to worship, to sacrifice, to do all sorts of things that we just can't discuss in polite company. See, while there was an initial push toward right living, an initial gratefulness toward God, it didn't filter its way down to all the people. There were still some who had not fully surrendered to his lordship. Now, I don't know about you, but I have that problem as well. Certain areas in my life that I haven't surrendered fully to God. And I think I'm doing okay, right? I went to Bible college, went to Sunday school, went to VBS, went to all these things, been a pastor for almost 5 years. Can you believe that? And yet, every day, sometimes multiple times a day, I'm reminded that there are areas in my life that I haven't fully surrendered to God. For some of us, that's this area in here. You say, well, God, I'll give you Sunday morning. You can have that. You can have 1 hour Sunday, maybe a little dabbling on Wednesday night, but that's all I'm giving you. Or God, I'm going to give you a little bit if there's a major need. I'll throw in a couple bucks, but you don't get control over my bank accounts. But ultimately, it's all His. We know that. The old saying, you can't take it with you. Some people say you never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. It's all His. Psalm 24 tells us, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Everything in it is His. That song that we sang, that God applied, it's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise. We just give it back to you. It all belongs to Him. So in what area of our life have we not fully surrendered? My good friend Craig Rochelle, we're not really good friends, but we met once. He writes in his book, Weird, because normal isn't working, he writes and tells a story about how he and his family realized that they needed to change their giving. They realized they needed to do something weird, something radical, something different. And they had been giving for a while. He's a pastor of a church in Oklahoma, and they'd been giving for a while, and they kind of felt like they needed to do something different. And so they started giving their 10%, which is a big deal. I mean, that we all know that's the tithe, right? 10%, that's what we're supposed to give. But people don't. I'm sure all of you do, but I'm just saying other people don't. Craig, they started with 10%, and he thought, man, that's really good, but that's not weird enough. And it's rare, but it's not weird, it's not radical, it's uncommon, but it's not radical. And so what he did, he and his family, they decided that every year, every year, they would increase their giving by 1%. Every year. They would increase their giving by 1%. Now, that's different than a dollar amount, right? Because a dollar amount is different. It has different weight, different value for different people, right? A dollar for me and a dollar for you might be different. $1 million for me and $1 million for Bill Gates has some different weight and value to it. But percentages, everybody feels percentages. So every year, they bump up their giving by 1%. Now, that might not be what you're called to do, but what it does is that it forces us to be in constant awareness of the gift that we've been given. We have to constantly go back and go, God, I thank you so much, and I want to give not out of compulsion, not out of legalistic obligation, but because I want to, I desire to, out of gratitude and gratefulness to you. And so here you go, another 1%. This year it's up to 12. This year it's up to 13, 14, 15, 24, 27, however long. It forces them to go back to their budget and go, okay, how can we adjust? It forces them to look at their long-term plans and go, okay, we've committed to increase our giving this long. What's that going to look like by the time that we're 67 and ready to retire? It forces them to be constantly aware of the gift. But if we don't give out of thanks to God, then what we'll discover is that our life, our finances, and then everything else is out of balance. It might stay up for a little bit. We might think things are going well, but not for long. Everybody still awake? Still with me? Cool. The second reason that we should give is I give in trust of leadership. I give in trust of the leadership. Back to 2 Kings, if you're still there. Let's continue the story. Joash, doing well. Verse 4. Joash, everybody say Joash. Okay. Joash said to the priests, collect all the money that's brought as sacred offerings to the temple of the Lord, the money collected in the census, the money received from personal vows, and the money brought voluntarily to the temple. Let every priest receive the money from one of the treasurers, and let it be used to repair whatever damage is found in the temple. Okay, so did you get that? Joash, he goes to the priests there in the temple, and he says, okay guys, and we're not sure when this happens. Maybe it happens when he's 7, maybe it happens a little bit later, we're not sure. But he goes to the priests in the temple. He's learned all these lessons from Jehoiada about giving out of gratefulness to God and all that. And he goes to the temple priests and he says, all right, here's what we need to do. I want you to take all the money that comes in from the offerings, all the money that people give personally, all the money that comes in voluntarily, and I want you to put that towards repairing the temple. Because as I mentioned, some of the kings didn't care about faith, and so the temple had started to degrade. And some of the people didn't care about faith, and so the temple had started to deteriorate. And some of the people didn't care about the temple, and so some of the things that the temple was offering just weren't being offered as nicely. And some of the people just didn't want to volunteer, and so the budget had to be cut. And so some of the people, and some of the people, and some of the people, and so Joash says, we need to take a moment and honor God in this way. Take all the money that comes in. We're going to put it towards repairing the place, dignifying it in such a way that it honors God. And then that will help us as we try to utilize our resources to His glory. Verse 6. But by the 23rd year of King Joash the priest, still had not repaired the temple. By the 23rd year of his reign, the priest still hadn't repaired the temple. And we don't know exactly when he confronted them, but it could be up to 23 years of reigning. It's a long time. So, King Joash, verse 7, summoned Jehoiada the priest and the other priests and asked them, why aren't you repairing the damage done to the temple? Take no more money from your treasurers, but hand it over for repairing the temple. So the priests agreed that they would not collect any more money from the people and that they would not repair the temple themselves. So they had this budget. Here's what we're going to use. This. We're going to take it aside. We're going to repair the temple. That didn't work. 23 years of that didn't work. The leaders had a responsibility to do and they didn't do it. And so that responsibility was withdrawn. That responsibility was taken away. And Joash confronts them. He says, look, I don't know why you haven't done it, but here's what we're going to do now. You're going to take the money, and we're going to sit down. There's going to be a representative from the throne, a royal secretary. There's going to be a priest there, and we're going to deal with this together to make sure this gets done because it's important. This giving thing has to matter. It's not just about lining our pockets. We've got to do something. Have you ever encountered or heard about leaders who wouldn't follow through on their promises? I mean, maybe, I'm just stabbing the dark here, maybe that's part of the reason why people generally don't like politicians. Because you and I know this, no matter what side of the political party you're on, the campaign trail is hot with promises, right? I will do this, and this, and this, and I'll never do that, or this, or that. But then those persons get into office, they find the job is harder than they thought, or it's busier than they thought, or it's more difficult than they thought, or there's more pressure than they thought, and we find that those promises go unfulfilled. Can you imagine if the church were ran that way? If our annual meetings that we have in February were like election day, you need some help imagining this. So let me help you out. We've got some campaign posters. This first one, don't be a jerk. Vote Cassie for clerk. Right? It's popular. It's a catchy slogan. And then there's this one. You can't forget this one. Dan Donham, a trustee. These are ridiculous, right? And then they also handed out buttons. Do you remember the political buttons? We also have a button here. Madison Esger in 17. Make board meetings great again. Yeah. Now we laugh because that's ridiculous, right? We would never have those sort of things, this sort of hot campaign trail with the people who are in leadership in the church. But sometimes we gauge our giving based on how well they're doing their job. And that's fine. That's part of the deal. Just like here in 2 Kings, when you're a leader and you're given a responsibility to take care of things, if you don't do it, then eventually that responsibility will be taken away. That privilege of leadership will be taken away. That opportunity to serve that we talked about a few weeks ago will be taken away. And so we can withdraw our giving, that's fine. But if we want to show our support for that leadership, if we want to say, I think you're doing a good job, or I'm glad I'm not in that position, or I know this is tough because I've done it before, and I want to support you however I can, one of the ways that we can support our leaders, not just the one in the tie at the front, is by putting money in a plate. Because that makes the leader's job a little easier. Because then they actually have money to do their job. James Emery White, the author, I think I've said this before, he wrote in a blog once, he said, do you know how much ministry can be done with $1? $1's worth. There are books out about youth ministry, the $5 youth ministry, or youth ministry on a shoestring budget, because oftentimes youth ministry is kind of the bottom of the barrel scrape for any budget, any extra money. If we give, we allow opportunity and resources so that ministry and responsibility can be taken care of. So that people can be taken care of. It makes it easier to be a leader. So by giving, I'm supporting the leadership and the ministry that's done. Essentially what you're saying when you put your money in the plate is not only am I thankful to God, but I'm thankful for the people who are in leadership in this organization, in this body, in this community. Because what these people are doing is incredible. They're working hard. They're spending extra time, money out of their own pocket, and I trust them to do it. Trust. It's a huge deal in any relationship, especially within the church. And if we don't trust our leaders to lead, if we don't trust our leaders to do what they're called to do, then why are we following them? And if you don't trust them, then lobby for change. But a relationship without trust is just plain unhealthy. Whether it be in the church, or the home, or the school, or the job site, wherever. If you want healthy relationships, it's got to be built on trust. But no trust. Things start getting a little shaky. And when things start getting a little shaky, it's awfully hard to balance. The third reason that we give to the church is I give to transition from old to new. I give to transition from old to new. Back to 2 Kings, verse 9. Jehoiada the priest took a chest, he bored a hole in it. He placed it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the temple of the Lord. The priests who guarded the entrance put into the chest all the money that was brought to the temple of the Lord. Whenever they saw that there was a large amount of money in the chest, the royal secretary and the high priest came, counted the money that had been brought into the temple of the Lord, and put it in bags. When the amount had been determined, they gave the money to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple. With it, they paid those who worked on the temple of the Lord, the carpenters, the builders, masons, stonecutters. They purchased timber and dressed stone for the repair of the temple of the Lord and met all the other expenses of restoring the temple. The money brought into the temple was not spent for making silver basins or wick trimmers or sprinkling bowls, trumpets, or any other articles of gold or silver for the temple of the Lord. It was paid to the workmen who used it to repair the temple. They did not require an accounting from those to whom they gave the money to pay the workers because they acted with complete honesty. The money from the guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the temple of the Lord. It belonged to the priests. Things changed. The Jehoiada, who had instructed Joash all this time about how to live rightly, realized that there needed to be something major done, and so he takes his big wooden chest, he bores a hole in the top of it, puts it right by the door of the church so that everybody sees it. As money comes into the church, the other priests and leaders there in the church, they take the money, they put it in the chest. As it gets full, they take it out. Somebody from the throne and somebody from the temple, they sit down, they count it all out. And then after they're all done, they take it and they hand it off so that people can repair the temple of the Lord. Did you notice how many times the temple of the Lord, repair the temple of the Lord, restore the temple of the Lord is mentioned in that little few verses that we just read? Suddenly there's a focus, there's a drive, and people's hearts are changed. And I love that line, it's just kind of thrown in there, that they didn't even need to take account because everybody acted in complete honesty. There's an idea. I give to transition from old to new. I give to change me, to change myself. Dave said it earlier. He said, every time that I give, I move along the spectrum from selfish to selfless. I move from being greedy to generous. I want to be the type of person that when it comes to handling God's money, I want to be the type of person that does it well. Not just so that at the end of my life I can look lavishly back on all my pile of gold and my giant house and all this other stuff. And don't get me wrong, that stuff is fine. Every good and perfect gift comes from above. Even jacuzzis. Even convertibles. Even TVs the size of your house. God is good. And so is high definition. But I want my heart to match everything else. I want my heart to be as big as my TV. I want to move along that spectrum. I want to be more generous today than I was yesterday. I want to be more honest today than I was yesterday. I want to be more responsible today than I was yesterday. I want to be more fun today than I was yesterday. The So I give to transition myself from old to new. Paul wrote it in Romans. He said, the old is gone, the new has come. And if we're not moving our hearts along that spectrum as it pertains to giving, then our life is woefully out of balance. Just doesn't work. Not for very long. When I was a kid growing up, I got an allowance. I was very lucky that way. And part of the deal with the allowance thing was, okay, you get an allowance, you got to put $1 in to the plate on Sunday morning. I grew up in church, so okay. So I put $1 in. Because after all, I sat here, my brother sat here, mom sat there, dad sat there. So they could tell as the plate came by, hey, oh yeah, that's right. Here you go. Sorry about that. So I made sure my dollar got in the plate. You fast forward a few years, and I was still making sure that dollar hit the plate. Of course, I was making money now. I was working with Dad. I had a job. So I was making quite a bit. And so, but I was still faithfully putting my dollar in. And it dawned on me, as I'm older, as I'm in college, as I'm married, maybe I should give God a little more. Why is it that I'm still giving like a child, but the rest of my life has grown up? So I increased my giving. And I increased my giving. And I increased my giving. Whether I was working there or not. Not because I wanted people to think highly of me, but because God has graciously given so much. And I want to be like Him. So I give to help bring balance to my life, to my account, to my soul. So, I don't know if this has been awkward for you or not. It's always a little awkward for me talking about giving. Because I don't want you to think that I'm going to ask for a special offering, feed my hungry children or anything like that. We're not doing that. It's not the pastor's retirement fund or pastor's new car fund or anything like that. I'm not going to take up a special offering today because every offering is special. Every offering gives me a chance to say thank you, to say I trust you, to say, I'm changing. Every offering is a chance to join God in what He's doing. In the church, in the world, and in me. So at this time, I'm going to ask the ushers to come up. And we're finally going to take the offering. Now, this is not a one-time deal. Please don't get this wrong. I did not preach this sermon so that we could be guilted into giving today. This is about a lifestyle choice. To be givers. To be generous as it pertains to the local church. Let me pray, and then we're going to take up the offering. Father God, I thank you so much for today. I thank you for this opportunity to give graciously, generously. God, every week we get the opportunity to say thank you by putting money in a plate. To support our local leadership by putting money in a plate. To move one step further along that spectrum from selfish to selfless by putting money in a plate. The amount is between us and you. The percentage is between us and you. But may we give not only our money, but our hearts, and surrender every high place that we have, so that we may be better lights, better reflections of your Son Jesus, who gave everything. We thank you for him. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Would you please pass the offering?